The Gormenghast Trilogy by Mervyn Peake. Book 1. Titus Groan. Soap for Greasepaint. Fuchsia squatted back on her heels in surprise as he sat bolt upright and glared at her. She could not hear what he muttered through his teeth. His dignity had been impaired, or perhaps not so much his dignity as his vanity. Passions he most certainly had, but he was more wily than passionate, and so even at this moment, with the sudden wrath and shock within him, he yet held himself in check, and his brain overpowered his anger, and he smiled hideously through the putrid scum. He got to his feet painfully. His hands were the dull sepia red of dry blood, for he had been bruised and cut in his long hours of climbing. His clothes were torn, his hair dishevelled and matted with dust and twigs and filth from his climb in the ivy. Standing as straight as he could, he inclined himself slightly towards Fuchsia, who had risen at the same time. "The Lady Fuchsia Groan," said Steerpike as he bowed. Fuchsia stared at him and clenched her hands at her sides. She stood stiffly. Her toes were turned slightly inwards towards each other, and she leaned a little forwards as her eyes took in the bedraggled creature in front of her. He was not much bigger than she was, but much more clever. She could see that at once. Now that he had recovered, her mind was filled with horror at the idea of this alien at large in her room. Suddenly, before she had known what she was doing, before she had decided to speak, before she knew of what to speak, her voice escaped from her hoarsely. "Oh, what do you want? Oh, what do you want? This is my room, my room!" Fuchsia clasped her hands at the curve of her breasts in the attitude of prayer, but she was not praying. Her nails were digging into the flesh of either hand. Her eyes were wide open. "Go away," she said. "Go away from my room." And then her whole mood changed as her feelings arose like a tempest. "I hate you!" she shouted, and stamped her foot upon the ground. "I hate you for coming here! I hate you in my room!" She seized the table edge with both her hands behind her and rattled it on its legs. Steerpike watched her carefully. His mind had been working away behind his high forehead. Unimaginative himself, he could recognize imagination in her. He had come upon one whose whole nature was the contradiction of his own. He knew that behind her simplicity was something he could never have, something which would never carry her to power nor riches, but would retard her progress and keep her apart in a world of her own make-believe. To win her favour he must talk in her own language. As she stood breathless beside the table, and as he saw her cast her eyes about the room as though to find a weapon, he struck an attitude, raising one hand, and, in an even, flat, hard voice that contrasted, even to Fuchsia in her agony, with her own passionate outcry, said, "Today I saw a great pavement among the clouds made of grey stones, bigger than a meadow. No one goes there, only a heron. Today I saw a tree growing out of a high wall, and people walking on it far above the ground. Today I saw a poet look out of a narrow window. But the stone field that is lost in the clouds is what you like best. Nobody goes there. It's a good place to play games and to—" He took the plunge cunningly. "And to dream of things." Without stopping, for he felt that it would be hazardous to stop. "I saw today," he said, "a horse swimming in the top of a tower. I saw a million towers today. I saw clouds last night. I was cold. I was colder than ice. I have had no food, I have had no sleep." He curled his lip in an effort to smile. "And then you pour green filth on me," he said. "And now I'm here where you hate me being. I'm here because there was nowhere else to go. I have seen so much. I have been out all night. I have escaped." He whispered the word dramatically. "And best of all, I found the field in the clouds. The field of stones." He stopped for breath and lowered his hand from its posturing and peered at Fuchsia. She was leaning against the table, her hands gripping its sides. It may have been the darkness that deceived him, but to his immense satisfaction he imagined she was staring through him. Realizing that if this was so, and his words were beginning to work upon her imagination. He must proceed without a pause, sweeping her thoughts along, allowing her only to think of what he was saying. He was clever enough to know what would appeal to her. Her crimson dress was enough for him to go on. She was romantic. She was a simpleton, a dreaming girl of 15 years. "Lady Fuchsia," he said, and clenched his hand at his forehead. "I come for sanctuary. I am a rebel. I am at your service as a dreamer and a man of action. I have climbed for hours, and am hungry and thirsty. I stood on the field of stones and longed to fly into the clouds, but I could only feel the pain in my feet. Go away," said Fuchsia in a distant voice. "Go away from me." But Steerpike was not to be stopped, for he noticed that her violence had died, and he was tenacious as a ferret. "Where can I go?" he said. "I would go this instant if I knew where to escape to. I have already been lost for hours in long corridors. Give me first some water so that I can wash this horrible slime from my face, and give me a little time to rest, and then I will go, far away, and I will never come again, but will live alone in the stone sky field where the herons build." Fuchsia's voice was so vague and distant that it appeared to Steerpike that she had not been listening, but she said slowly, "Where is it? Who are you?" Steerpike answered immediately. "My name is Steerpike," he said, leaning back against the window in the darkness, "but I cannot tell you now where the field of stone lies all cold in the clouds. No, I couldn't tell you that. Not yet." "Who are you?" said Fuchsia again. "Who are you in my room?" I have told you," he said. "I am Steerpike. I have climbed to your lovely room. I like your pictures on the walls and your book and your horrible route." "My route is beautiful." "Beautiful!" shouted Fuchsia. "Do not talk about my things. I hate you for talking about my things. Don't look at them." She ran to the twisted and candle-lit route of smooth wood in the wavering darkness and stood between it and the window where he was. Steerpike took out his little pipe from his pocket and sucked the stem. She was a strange fish, he thought, and needed careful selected bait. "How did you get to my room?" said Fuchsia huskily. "I climbed," said Steerpike. "I climbed up the ivy to your room. I have been climbing all day." "Go away from the window," said Fuchsia. "Go away to the door." Steerpike, surprised, obeyed her, but his hands were in his pockets. He felt more sure of his ground. Fuchsia moved gauchily to the window, taking up the candle as she passed the table, and peering over the sill, held the shaking flame above the abyss. The drop, which she remembered so well by daylight, looked even more terrifying now. She turned towards the room. "You must be a good climber," she said sullenly, but with a touch of admiration in her voice which Steerpike did not fail to detect. "I am," said Steerpike. "But I can't bear my face like this any longer. Let me have some water. Let me wash my face, your ladyship. And then if I can't stay here, tell me where I can go and sleep. I haven't had a cat's nap. I am tired, but the stone field haunts me. I must go there again after I've rested." There was a silence. "You've got kitchen clothes on," said Fuchsia flatly. "Yes," said Steerpike, "but I'm going to change them. It's the kitchen I escaped from. I detested it. I want to be free. I shall never go back." "Are you an adventurer?" said Fuchsia, who, although she did not think he looked like one, had been more than impressed by his climb and by the flow of his words. "I am," said Steerpike. "That's just what I am. But at the moment I want some water and soap." There was no water in the attic, but the idea of taking him down to her bedroom where he could wash and then go away for food rankled in her, for he would pass through her other attic rooms. Then she realized that he had, in any event, to leave her sanctum, and saving for the return climb down the ivy, the only path lay through the attics and down the spiral staircase to her bedroom. Added to this was the thought that if she took him down now, he would see very little of her rooms in the darkness, whereas tomorrow her attic would be exposed. "Lady Fuchsia," said Steerpike, "what work is there that I can do? Will you introduce me to someone who can employ me? I am not a kitchen lackey, my ladyship. I am a man of purpose. Hide me tonight, Lady Fuchsia, and let me meet someone tomorrow who may employ me. All I want is one interview. My brains will do the rest." Fuchsia stared at him open-mouthed. Then she thrust her full lower lip forward and said, "What's the awful smell?" "It's the filthy dregs you drowned me in," said Steerpike. "It's my face you're smelling." "Oh," said Fuchsia. She took up the candle again. "You'd better follow." Steerpike did so, out of the door, along the balcony, and then down the ladder. Fuchsia did not think of helping him in the ill-lit darkness, though she heard him stumble. Steerpike kept as close to her as he could and the little patch of faint candle-light on the floor which preceded her. But as she threaded her way dexterously between the oddments that lay banked up in the first attic, he was more than once struck across the face by a hanging rope of spiked seashells, by the giraffe's leg which Fuchsia ducked beneath, and once he was brought to a gasping halt by the brass hilt of a sword. When he had reached the head of the spiral staircase, Fuchsia was already halfway down, and he wound after her, cursing. After a long time he felt the close air of the staircase lighten about him, and a few moments later he had come to the last of the descending circles, and had stepped down into a bedroom. Fuchsia lit a lamp on the wall. The blinds were not drawn, and the black night filled up the triangles of her window. She was pouring from a jug the water which Steerpike so urgently needed. The smell was beginning to affect him, for as he had stepped down into the room he had retched incontinently with his thin bony hands at his stomach. At the gurgling sound of the water as it slopped into the bowl on Fuchsia's washstand, he drew a deep breath through his teeth. Fuchsia, hearing his foot descend upon the boards of her room, turned, jug in hand, and as she did so she overflooded the bowl with a rush of water, which in the lamplight made bright pools on the dark ground. "Water," she said, "if you want it." Steerpike advanced rapidly to the basin and plucked off his coat and vest, and stood beside Fuchsia in the darkness, very thin, very bunched at the shoulders, and with an extraordinary peakiness in the poise of his body. "What about soap?" said Steerpike, lowering his arms into the basin. The water was cold, and he shivered. His shoulder blades stood out sharply from his back as he bent over and shrugged his shoulders together. "I can't get this muck off without soap and a scrubbing brush, your ladyship." "There's some things in that drawer," said Fuchsia slowly. "Hurry up and finish, and then go away. You're not in your own room. You're in my room where no one's allowed to come, only my old nurse. So hurry up and go away." "I will," said Steerpike, opening the drawer and rummaging among the contents until he had found a piece of soap. "But don't forget you promised to introduce me to someone who might employ me." "I didn't," said Fuchsia. "How do you dare to tell such lies to me? How do you dare?" Then came Steerpike's stroke of genius. He saw that there was no object in pressing his falsehood any further, and, making a bold move into the unknown, he leapt with great agility away from the basin, his face now thick in lather. Wiping away the white froth from his lips, he channeled a huge dark mouth with his forefinger, and posturing in the attitude of a clown listening, he remained immobile for 7 long seconds with his hand to his ear. Where the idea had come from he did not know, but he had felt since he first met Fuchsia that if anything were to win her favour, it was something tinged with the theatre, the bizarre, and yet something quite simple and guileless. And it was this that Steerpike found difficult. Fuchsia stared hard. She forgot to hate him. She did not see him. She saw a clown, a living limb of nonsense. She saw something she loved as she loved her root, her giraffe leg, her crimson dress. "Good!" she shouted, clenching her hands. "Good! Good, good, good!" All at once she was on her bed, landing upon both her knees at once. Her hands clasped the footrail. A snake writhed suddenly under the ribs of Steerpike. He had succeeded. What he doubted for the moment was whether he could live up to the standard he had set himself. He saw, out of the corner of his eye, which like the rest of his face was practically smothered in soapsuds, the dim shape of Lady Fuchsia looming a little above him on the bed. It was up to him. He didn't know much about clowns, but he knew that they did irrational things very seriously, and it had occurred to him that Fuchsia would enjoy them. Steerpike had an unusual gift. It was to understand a subject without appreciating it. He was almost entirely cerebral in his approach. But this could not easily be perceived, so shrewdly, so surely he seemed to enter into the heart of whatever he wished. in his words or his deeds, to mimic. From the ludicrous listening posture he straightened himself slowly, and with his toes turned outwards extravagantly, he ran a few steps towards a corner of Fuchsia's room, and then stopped to listen again, his hand at his ear. Continuing his run, he reached the corner and picked up, after several efforts at getting his hand to reach as far down as the floor, a piece of green cloth, which he hobbled back with, his feet as before turned out so as to produce between them a continuous line. Fuchsia, in a transport, watched him, the knuckles of her right hand in her mouth, as he began a thorough examination of the bed rail immediately below her. Every now and then he would find something very wrong with the iron surface of the rail, and would rub it vigorously with his rag, stand back from it for a longer view, with his head on one side, the dark of his soapless mouth drooping at each corner in anguish, and then polish the spot again, breathing upon it, and rubbing it with an inhuman concentration of purpose. All the time he was thinking, "What a fool I am, but it will work." He could not sink himself. He was not the artist. He was the exact imitation of one. All at once he removed with his forefinger a plump sud of soap from the centre of his forehead, leaving a rough, dark circle of skin where it had been, and tapped his frothy finger along the footrail 3 times at equal intervals, leaving about a third of the soap behind at each tap. Waddling up and down at the end of the bed, he examined each of these blobs in turn, and, as though trying to decide which was the most imposing specimen, removed one after the other until, with only the central sud remaining, he came to a halt before it, and then, kicking away one of his feet in an extraordinary nimble way, he landed himself flat on his face in a posture of obedience. Fuchsia was too thrilled to speak. She only stared, happy beyond happiness. Steerpike got to his feet and grinned at her, the lamplight glinting upon his uneven teeth. He went at once to the basin and renewed his ablutions more vigorously than ever. While Fuchsia knelt on her bed and Steerpike rubbed his head and face with an ancient and grubby towel, there came a knock upon the door, and Nanny Slag's voice piped out thinly. "Is my conscience there? Is my sweet piece of trouble there? Are you there, my dear heart, then? Are you there? No, Nanny, no, I'm not. Not now. Go away and come back again soon. And I'll be here," shouted Fuchsia thickly, scrambling to the door, and then with her mouth to the keyhole. "What do you want? What do you want?" "Oh, my poor heart, what's the matter then? What's the matter then? What is it, my conscience?" "Nothing, Nanny, nothing. What do you want?" said Fuchsia, breathing hard. Nanny was used to Fuchsia's sudden and strange changes of mood, so after a pause in which Fuchsia could hear her sucking her wrinkled lower lip, the old nurse answered, "It's the doctor, dear. He says he's got a present for you, my baby. He wants you to go to his house, my only, and I'm to take you." Fuchsia, hearing a tick-tick behind her, turned and saw a very clean-looking Steerpike gesturing to her. He nodded his head rapidly and jerked his thumb at the door, and then, with his index and longest finger strutting along the washstand, indicated, as far as she could read, that she should accept the offer to walk to the doctor's with Nanny Slag. "All right," shouted Fuchsia, "but I'll come to your room. Go there and wait." "Hurry then, my love," wailed the thin, perplexed voice from the passage. "Don't keep him waiting." As Mrs. Slag's feet receded, Fuchsia shouted, "What's he giving me?" But the old nurse was beyond earshot. Steerpike was dusting his clothes as well as he could. He had brushed his sparse hair, and it looked like dank grass as it lay flatly over his big forehead. "Can I come too?" he said. Fuchsia turned her eyes to him quickly. "Why?" she said at last. "I have a reason," said Steerpike. "You can't keep me here all night anyway, can you?" This argument seemed good to Fuchsia, and, "Oh yes, you can come too," she said at once. "But what about Nanny?" she added slowly. "What about my nurse?" "Leave her to me," said Steerpike. "Leave her to me." Fuchsia hated him suddenly and deeply for saying this, but she made no answer. "Come on then," she said. "Don't stay in my room any more. What are you waiting for?" And unbolting the door, she led the way, Steerpike following her like a shadow to Mrs. Slag's bedroom.